It's a movement of spiritual enlightenment too, one gets with Blake's help. He brings you close to God, he brings you close to Christ, he brings you close to the word of spirituality. He reminds you of the social injustices around us and our duty to do something to improve everybody's life. A way of reaching up to the infinite, really, to the divinity. And Blake has that capacity to transport us to that world.
There's money in that. Yeah, well, it's a really nice place if you can get some kind of brewery to invest in sort of let's store that whiskey here for years or something.
And does Albion technically own it, or are you kind of the government?
We
the guardian?
no, the land is owned by the Crown Estate Department, so this is the Crown Estate Gate and Rolls is an right. And then is it just you, or is there another? No, there's another company. Yeah, I like it. What's going on here? Neil is making horizontal cuts at floor level, into which, when the machines go through, we'll put hydro bags, inflate them, and the forces produced will just displace the stone off of the floor. Yeah, from this area, this is where the stone came from.
It's quite amazing to stand in the place, isn't it, James, to get that feel of how deep we are underground, and to be taking such an amazing memorial out of what we're necessarily sort of standing on, and taking it up to breathe above ground, to give life to Blake once again.
So, would it be Jerusalem or would it be a dark satanic mill, I suppose? I don't know. Who knows? His perspective on things would be very different to ours, wouldn't it? But hopefully he would be appreciative of the place and of the heritage and of the material, what it all means. I would hope so anyway.
Blake is a great companion. At whatever age of your life you are, Blake asks those really profound questions. And I think today his relevance more than anything is the imagination. That word is very loosely used today, but for Blake it was quite precise, that we end up in a ratio. Because of the nature of our minds, we tend to go in a straight line. And for Blake, it's really important to break out of it. And one way of doing that is the imagination. So, in order to look at the world we inhabit, the imagination for Blake is a key. And he would often criticize people, totems that were aligned with science or philosophy, because he thought they weren't open enough to the human range of possibilities, the divine. When William Blake died, he was buried among his kith and kin in Bunhill Fields, which is often described as a dissenter's graveyard. It was set up at the time of the plague, but by the time it was enclosed and open, the plague had finished. And so since it was a graveyard not attached to a particular church, as was the tradition, it became known as a graveyard for people of dissenting sects, people who couldn't be buried in a Church of England graveyard. Blake himself, when he came to be buried, was interred in an unmarked grave, but it wasn't unrecorded. We know the exact coordinates where he was laid: 77, 32, 9, east-west, north-south, and the depth in feet, 9 feet down. There are 8 people in this grave, Blake and 7 others, and Blake is 4th from the bottom. So he's in the company of others in his grave. The fact that perhaps our greatest poet and artist is in an unmarked grave offends many people. And so on the anniversary, the centenary of his death, he died in 1827. In 1927, a gravestone was put on his actual place of burial. That survived for some years, but after the Second World War there was some bomb damage to Bunhill Fields, but also the City of London thought it would be a nice idea if it could become in part a garden, so people working in the city could have somewhere to have their lunch and to walk and to relax. And so an Act of Parliament cleared a whole section of Bunhill Fields and it became a lawn. In that clearance, the gravestone of William Blake, which wasn't original and is made, as I said, in 1927, was moved to where it's found now. So that gravestone is not in the right place, is not original, and there was a belief that the exact place of interment should be marked. So we approached the various authorities, and it has taken us 12 years to do this, mainly because as the section of Bunhill Fields was cleared through an Act of Parliament, the fear of everyone was that we would need another Act of Parliament to put back a gravestone. We made various compromises. Bunhill Fields became listed as a landscape rather than as a building. This helped a little bit. But only in the last few months have we got to the stage when authority could be granted to put back a marker for William Blake.
Blake's an iconic worldwide figure now, which I hope wherever Blake is now, having died in poverty and obscurity, hopefully he's smiling somewhere. My introduction to Blake really was at high school. At first it just seemed very quaint, chimney sweepers, lamps, didn't see the relevance. But as I sort of grew into my political consciousness, my social consciousness, my spirituality, then I came back to him at A-level with an art and design A-level, blew my mind and sort of tapped into where I was at as a young person in terms of thinking about the wider world, thinking about how can we make the world a little bit better. So that's where Blake really captured my heart. So in my teenage years I started rapping and beatboxing, and and a lot of the social messages that are within hip hop and sort of the yearning for spirituality which you can find within hip hop, and sort of the idea, what did he say? My streets are my imagination. You know, when I see that and his awareness of divinity, even in the midst of industry and bricks and factories and commerce and hypocrisy, still managing to find the divine in all that, like, that really inspires me.
I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse.
So yeah, I often think, like, if Blake was alive today, in the 2017, 18, etc., I think to myself, you know, if he lived in multicultural London, one of the most multicultural cities in the world, surrounded by this whole city being reborn around itself, I think he'd also be doing hip-hop, which has its own visual language, as well as musical language. We talk about songs of innocence, songs of experience. I think, I bet he'd be rapping too. And so I often think, and his social justice messages, his sort of inclusivity, seeing the divine in different religions, in different faces, the anti-slavery message. I think he'd be a hip-hop artist, railing against the system. So Blake is that, speaks to me now as an artist about staying sincere, staying with your heart. Yes, we're using our intellect, but we're submitting to our imagination and to our heart and to our spirituality. In a world where everything is empirical and we're fanatical about the tangible and the accumulation of things, I think Blake's message speaks to me personally about actually we need to take a step back and see that there is more than just the money and 2.4 kids and mortgages and the very, very sort of superficial ways that we can see life. And there is love and there is imagination and there can be a sense of purpose, and that really inspires me.
We're looking to the 12th of August 2018, the date of Blake's death to unveil this new grave marker. It will be a flat stone, what's called a ledger stone, in the exact position where Blake is buried. At present, that is under a London plane tree on a lawn. So people will be able to come and see the place of burial of William Blake. It's taken a struggle to raise money to commission this grave marker. Because of the difficulty of getting permissions, we researched and resourced and commissioned the leading letter cutter in the country.
So that's a completely useless piece of stone. I mean, it's beautiful. If you look at the actual material, yeah, that's beautiful. But if there's a shake through it, and these are obvious shakes, so you need a piece of stone that is completely sort of safe and secure and solid. By the time we get it, you'll see it on the saw, it'll be a slab, slab of 4-inch thick, because that's what we're doing. And that slab, we know exactly the front and the back, exactly whether that's a sound piece or not. Because you don't want to start off by a piece that's not sound. I think we've chosen.
Alida Cardoso of the Cardozo Kindersley workshop. There is this cascade of influence from Blake through Eric Gill to Kindersley to Lida. And that's important because of the connection of these creative people. So we have someone to cut this stone who not only has done the major commissions in this country, but also has this shimmering connection to Blake.
thou art sick. The invisible worm that flies in the night in the howling storm has found out thy bed of crimson joy, and his dark secret love does thy life destroy.
And our world is dying because of this monocultural human being that we're creating out of our educational systems. We need more of a Blakean invitation to a broader horizon of understanding of what it means to be a human being participating fully in their world.
You know, once it's in Bunhill Fields, to start with, it'll look all white and new.
Yes.
But fortunately, very soon, I think this one is going to go quite green because it's under a tree.
Right.
So it'll become a green and pleasant thing. A green and pleasant stone rather than a green and pleasant land. Marvellous about the analytic work and the training that I've done and the working with Blake is it's enabled me to slowly work through some of my chaos and to be aware of these layers and to have some idea of these layers and then to be able to use them in one's work.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great privilege, I have to say.
Yeah.
And a great labour.
Yeah.
Because he did say every line is particular, every line I draw is imbued with an emotional feeling. And it's true, the more you look at it, it is not just somebody drawing a picture, it's somebody giving their soul to their work. So you literally, like listening to a beautiful piece of music, if you look at the particulars of Blake's work, you get his soul, you get Blake. And I think that's why I go back and back to him, because who wouldn't want to be with Blake? What's so lovely about Blake is how he talks about contraries, or contraries he sometimes calls them. And I think that's very different than opposites. I think what he's talking about in contraries is the complement. You need the complement. You need the masculine and the feminine. You need love and hate. And what he says is, religion has made this into good and bad, and then that's right and that's wrong.
Yeah.
And that is what Blake abhors, because you've lost the balance, you've lost the contraries that always have to be there together. So that's also something I think a lot about with my patients. I actually think that Blake is much more keeping my mind in shape, keeping my mind as much as I can in fourfold vision. Because it's the mind that I bring to it that I think is really what's impactful on the patient.
Of course. Very much.
And I think that it's up to all analysts, certainly, who are working on this deep level and sometimes are working 4 times a week with somebody. You're like an athlete in a way. You've got to keep yourself at the highest peak of attention, which isn't something awful, but it does require labour. And so part of my labour is Blake. So to answer that question, I would look at Blake. I would say to myself, you don't know where you are with this patient at the moment. Go and look at some Blake.
It may be that a new attention to Blake himself is that first stage in a kind of awakening. There is something terrible about the fact that the original stone that marked Blake's space was lost, that people didn't know, that the forgetting, as it were, of the location of Blake's mortal remains was, if you like, an outward and visible sign of a bigger amnesia about which Blake himself had written, a failure to understand, if you like, that inner prophetic, to understand, if you like, the inner spiritual Albion sleeping rather than the outward mere Great Britain. So I think it may be that this wonderful moment, perhaps late in the day, but it's happening, where we as a nation are recollecting that we were given a great prophet and that we've neglected him and that he's become marginalised or just pushed into the sort of, a couple of posters in an art shop rather than the prophetic word to the nation. So the return to that place, the setting up of that stone, the marking physically of it, so that it can become a place of pilgrimage. I mean, in the prophetic poem Jerusalem, Albion is kind of making a journey in towards the heart of London, and there's an awakening and seeing the divine shining out potentially within the city itself. So there is, I think, a great deal to be said about all of us outward and visibly assembling, about the making of a beautiful new inscription and the placing the stone, provided that place becomes a spiritual portal and gateway and doesn't just become another outward and visible achievement and attainment. It's a place at which the doors of perception must be cleansed, rather than a place to which you just go to carry a report and take a selfie.
Glorious to be here and glorious to see so many assembled. And those we see assembled, we are only seeing with our mortal vegetable eye. If Blake, I won't say if Blake were here, because Blake is here. Indeed, he's everywhere now. And there are vast throngs here, I think, among the immortals, delighting at this moment in time. We were asked to just find a couple of passages that were inspirational or numinous or determinative for us as writers. So I've got two, both from the great poem Jerusalem, not the song we sing, which is appended to the poem Milton, but the long prophetic epic, which speaks directly to our time, both of its tragedy and irony, but also of great hope, when finally Albion will wake from the bad dream of his imperialism and the bad dream of his oppressions and from the cruelty of the mills, and will awake to love again. That's what that poem is about. So here is what Blake said, trembling, as he considered the task that had been given to him by the immortals to write, by Christ himself. So this is Blake's personal invocation to the great prophecy of England's fall and her recovery. Trembling, I sit day and night. My friends are astonished at me. I should think they certainly were astonished at him. Yet they forgive my wanderings. Now here's the key. I rest not from my great task to open the eternal worlds, to open the immortal eyes of man inwards into the worlds of thought. The eternal worlds and the immortal eyes are all assembled here. Yours are the immortal eyes, if you'll let Blake open them. The eternal worlds are in your bosom. So he goes on. To open the immortal eyes of man inwards
into the worlds of thought, into eternity, ever expanding in the bosom of God, the human imagination. The bosom of God, the human imagination, equivalent terms in Blake's world. And then he invokes Christ. O Saviour, pour upon me thy spirit of meekness and love. Annihilate the selfhood in me. Be thou all my life. I sometimes have my fellow priests in the Church of England say to me, how can you be so deeply into Blake? Isn't he a bit weird and like, you know, esoteric? And I just show them this prayer. And I say, if that isn't a prayer we should all be saying, then none of us should be here. O Saviour, pour upon me thy spirit. However, although Christ is his muse in Jerusalem, Blake has a severe word and a joyful word to say to the church. And I want to conclude what I say, as it were, preaching to myself and my fellow members of an established church, these prophetic words of Blake, which I thank God the church is now, I think, at last, after 191 years, beginning to hear. This is what Blake says to the Christians in Jerusalem. I know of no other Christianity and of no other gospel than the liberty, both of body and mind, to exercise the divine arts of imagination. Imagination, the real and eternal world, of which this vegetable universe is but a faint shadow, and in which we shall live in our eternal imaginative bodies when these vegetable bodies are no more. It's an honor to me to honor 9 feet down that vegetable body, which was once William Blake. But it's a far greater joy to me to know that his eternal and imaginative body is alive and with us and working through his poetry in all of you. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Yes, I've got there. Just clean this little corner here. Sometimes quite difficult when you go as deep as you can to get in those little corners, which is fine. I never ask for an easy life, but sometimes it's difficult. I think the whole idea is that this is the size of chisel for this kind of letter. For that chisel, I will use probably a different tool on it, because I really have to have a big chisel there. Can you see that? Mm. So once I get going to that kind of size, that big, blade, that's what it's all about. This is his lifespan. This is where he came in. That's his life, where he went out. So that is sort of boom. Rather like we cut a letter. You go into the stone, and then you come out, and that's what we all do in life. You come into it, and you go out. So that's important, very important. So that's heavier. And then what he did with his life, being a poet, being an artist, being a prophet, that is the chosen life. That's what, if we choose our lives, I think, what do I know? But that's what he made, what he did with it. He could have, even if he was a born poet, he could have chosen not to be one. So I think it's a matter of choice. And then that's what he's giving us. So that's the narrative, if you like. If you are a Blakean, you know what this is about. But if you're not, you're being given something here. Just a tiny little end, but you're given something that could lead you into what he does.
Blake now, he was able to combine an astonishing, extraordinary philosophy with poetry almost from the beginning, and of course with the visual arts too. So an extraordinary constellation coming together of so many qualities that human being understand implicitly as these deep chordal orchestrations that are possible inside a human being. I often think that that Blake is the poet's poet because every poet begins with an internal, unspoken universe which they find impossible to articulate in the outer world. Yeah. And here's Blake with this astonishing, singular, eccentric, over the edge world which is now belongs to all of us. Yeah. Many of his images are in the mainstream, his songs, Jerusalem, I sang at school, yeah. And it was the one song where we all just let rip, where we let ourselves go into that song. So it was quite extraordinary later, as I got more serious about my poetry, to discover that this man was a serious artist, a serious poet. And that had been written out of the privacy of his own vision and his own empire of understanding, which we all became citizens of many years later.
Yeah, nice, huh? You see here the steps of each blow. That's what we call the blow of conviction. So when you nice, huh?
But it's done.
Yeah, that's done with no doubt in your mind. Because if you start doubting, you start shoveling.
There ain't no going back from
there. Oh no.
The green and pleasant land that Blake spoke about lives inside human beings. It's the conversation between a possible template of happiness inside them and an expression of that in the outer world. We have in religious and contemplative, well, literally contemplative terms, we use the word contemplation. And it's really the ability to make a template of heaven inside your own body. Whether you're sat on a black cushion in a Zen monastery or writing in your studio or working in your engraving shop like Blake, you're attempting to create a conversation between the internal and external world. What if every bird that cuts the airy way is but a universe entire, closed to your senses five? And I remember reciting those lines to myself as a young naturalist guide in the Galapagos Islands. And when I got to those islands as a naturalist, I was so terrified by the place because none of the animals or birds corresponded or behaved in ways in which I'd been taught in my zoology books. None of these birds or animals had read any of the zoology books that I had studied. And they all insisted on being themselves, unutterably themselves. And there was also some kind of relationship to death there. And the fact that when you paid attention to something other than yourself, the person who began the process of attention would never survive the conversation that you created by that deep sense of attention. And that's something that Blake spoke to all the time, the way human identity is transformed by this fierce attentiveness.
Sometimes, ironically, this tiny little thing here takes longer than the big one. So it's all sort of fiddly. Whilst that you really know how the stone is going to behave, and you can go with it. And here it's sort of tiddly.
When he's looking at the way that our social systems become so abstracted from human joy and human creativity that they become barriers to our becoming rather than a doorway through to the future. And I would say that many of our educational systems, we're standing now in the middle of the educational epicenter of the world, which is Oxford, in the Ashmolean Museum here. And I do feel like the old educational dispensation is coming to an end. Exactly because we have so much emphasis on all of our academic achievements. But the kind of identity that we shape through achieving these academic titles, are creating human beings who have a narrow relationship with this broad and infinite horizon of the natural world that Blake spoke to. So Blake looked at the way that our myopic attempts to have power over things inform all of our social systems. And at the time when Blake was alive, Pleasant land that Blake spoke about lives inside human beings. It's the conversation between a possible template of happiness inside them and an expression of that in the outer world. This is the invitation he was making both in his time and that he still makes to us now, is get out from beyond yourself. Get out beyond yourself. Get out from your narrow human aims at times in order to broaden the horizon of your understanding.
I feel a bit tremulous standing here by Blake's grave with a dog collar on. I think he might have been appalled, but my only saving grace is that perhaps he might have thought that if anyone should be a priest, it could be a woman. I walk past the place of Blake's baptism every day, many times a day. It's the ornate font at the west end of St James Piccadilly, where I'm rector currently. It's decorated with the riotous marble carving of the 17th century carver Grinling Gibbons. And I think he carved a premonition of a Blakean Adam and Eve leaning, holding up the font, somewhat lasciviously up against the tree of life. As we've heard as a baptized adult, Blake was viciously critical of the corruption and indolence of the church of his day. As a prophet and visionary, he was able to tear into the doctrine and practice of a church that, to his mind, had lost touch with the prophetic and visionary Jesus, preferring instead its compromises in an unequal society where the poor were ignored by church and state alike. We've heard too that voice is much needed in today's church and today's society. There are two aspects to prophetic imagination that I find in William Blake. The first is anguish and fury at the present. Deep anguish at the injustices, petty and otherwise, with which we're surrounded today as Blake was. We shackle ourselves too easily with locked mental manacles as immutable as iron ones. We efficiently and comprehensively solder the bars of our own prison walls by our own self-limiting beliefs and our habitual repetition of the mantras that we live by. We are afraid of being free. And so I wonder here at Blake's grave, what are my own mind-forged manacles, forged in the furnace of my own fear? What would Blake say today about the melting ice caps or banning the burqa? Would Blake be on Twitter? I want to be always listening as I walk past that font every day for a Blakean voice to cut through the marble men who so often populate our church and state. Unlock my mind and commit myself as both a Christian and a priest to listen to that prophetic and critical voice and never be afraid of the darker, deeper, messy, and compromised recesses of my own mind that, once unlocked, can set me and others free. I give you the end of a golden stream. When you wind it into a bowl,
It winds the heaven's gates, but in Jerusalem's wall. It winds the heaven's gates, but in Jerusalem's wall. Heaven's gates, but in Jerusalem's wall. Did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? And was Jerusalem in the hill among these dark satanic hills? Bring me my bow, burning gold. Bring me my arrows of his heart. Bring me my spear, oh clouds unfold. Bring me my chariot of fire. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem, the England's green and pleasant.
Let's honour Blake, his wonderful work and his life. And in those streets where angels hide, walk upon England's mountains.
Thank you.